Next up on the number one tee.
Well, hello and welcome back to your virtual tea time. My name is Tori, and today we have a very special episode. I have Raymond Prior joining us, author of Golf Beneath the Surface, the new science of golf psychology, which is a practical guide for composure under pressure, long-term growth, and more fulfillment and building a better relationship with the game. I think that last part really got me, Raymond. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me. A bit of a long time coming, so I was glad we got to set it up.
Absolutely. What brought you to write the book and get started on the content about golf?
It's been a bit of a project that I wanted to do for quite a while. Just been difficult finding the time for it. And then when we had a pandemic and my travel to different clients, including LPGA and PGA Tour clients, was kind of on a hold. It was a perfect time to sit down and actually write the book, finish reading all the research that I needed to read to do it. My hope is that the book's a bit of a challenge to the status quo of the psychology available in the golf realm, because a lot of it's not very good.
Yeah.
Not to professionally bash anybody else, but the bottom line is variety of the psychological kind of methodologies and concepts that people are working from are grossly outdated.
Yeah.
And we know more about the human brain and human psychology than we have before. And so my hope is that this book brings some of that together for the reader.
Absolutely. And who is the reader of the book? Like, is it a golfer trying to get better? Is it the casual golfer? Is someone trying to go to the professional level? Is it all golfers? Who do you think this book's ideal for? It's
all golfers. I've gotten great feedback from people who are high handicap players who, quite frankly, what success would be in their golf experience is just enjoying the game more. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is that playing more freely is more enjoyable for us, regardless of your skill level. And you'll get more out of whatever skill level you've currently developed playing more freely. And so the book provides a significant amount of information about how to do that and addresses some of the misinformation about how people typically do that. But it's also gotten really strong feedback from a lot of tour players on both the LPGA and the PGA Tour and all the professional tours around the world, because it's currently, and this isn't me bragging, this is feedback from other people, it's currently the first book that really gets into people's experience at a mechanistic level. Yeah. Not, hey, just be present, but asking the question, why aren't you present more often in the first place?
Exactly.
Right? That's an important question for everybody to ask.
I can absolutely agree with that. And you use Stacy as an example throughout the book. I don't think that's her real name, but she is a professional player, and she has, she's playing scared, and she has a playing scared habit and an anxiety habit. And as you walk through her tackling those two really unproductive habits throughout the book, I could relate to a lot of it. I could see, I almost wanted to copy and paste everything Stacy's going to doing the framework myself. I'm like, wait, do I have to make this up? Because this is all just me. You're talking about me.
Yeah, Stacy's experience, not her real name, as you alluded to, is common to golfers of all levels, including a lot of professional golfers. It would be a misconception to think that professional golfers have this unwavering confidence that they don't experience anxiety, they don't have disruptive inner experience, meaning thoughts and feelings, and that they haven't developed habits that are really unproductive for them, even though they're really good at what they're doing. So a variety of people can resonate with many of the examples in the book, Stacy's being one of them, because she has a series of habits that she has been trying to step away from for a really long time. But the methodologies for which she was doing it are rooted in outdated science that doesn't work as well as the stuff that we know now. And if we understand how habits form in our brains and how we can step away from them, the process for doing so becomes far more effective.
Now, you go through habits that aren't serving you. And a lot of them, again, I can relate to. I'm just counting here like about 11 or 12 habits that I wrote down: overthinking, self-criticism, panic practice. That was a new term that I heard. And yes, dwelling, blaming, comparing, control, worry, protect your score habit, entitlement habit. What do you see the most common? If there was like one or two habits that you could just wipe off the planet and it would serve everyone so much better, like the two most used habits of a golfer might be.
All of those habits fall under the umbrella of being off time. Off time meaning I'm either dwelling on the past or I am worried about the future. Mm-hmm. So we as human beings are happiest, healthiest, and highest functioning when we are present. So when our psychological time frame is synced with the actual time frame of our lives, a variety of those habits either are us being off time, for example, dwelling or anxiety, or they are symptomatic of us and draw us to being off time. For example, something like an entitlement habit creates this idea that the future should just go a certain way because I want it to. And so I'm always drawn toward the future. Or a panic practice is I'm dwelling on how poorly I played, and I'm trying to practice in a way that makes me feel better about the future. Mm-hmm. And so all of those are rooted in us moving into a time frame that doesn't exist for us currently. Again, really helpful for us to be able to learn from our past, reflect on it, and draw information from it, because that helps us move toward the futures that we want to plan to and pursue. But the bottom line is the more we get stuck in those, more often, the less happy, less healthy, and less functioning we are. And we know through a variety of different research that if you ask people, hey, what time frame are you in physically? What time frame are you in psychologically? And the farther and more often those differ, the less high functioning we are, the less quickly we learn, the more frustration and anxiety we tend to experience. And then our relationship with the thing that we're doing starts to become very conditional and transactional, in which case then it's very difficult to enjoy something that is inherently challenging and enjoyable on its own.
And you go through a bunch of better options, other than those habits, like better options to be more present on the course and to enjoy it more. And I just want to touch on one of them because you have a whole section in the book about mindfulness. And as I'm reading that section, it's very hard for me to take the information in and think realistically that I can pull it off. Mindfulness just seems like so big to me. Does that make any sense? Like it just seems unattainable sometimes. And maybe that's just my current state of where I'm at.
What is it that you're hoping to attain through mindfulness? That would be my question.
Just staying in the present, and being able to not, move towards the future, have that anxiety about the future and dwelling on the past. Like just what you said prior to that, it just seems, I don't know. It just seems tough. It seems tough.
Yeah. Well, if our default setting, perhaps our habit, is to time travel a lot. Learning to be present more often can be clunky at first, and it's challenging because it requires effort. And really what that means is the slower, weaker parts of our brain are engaged while we're learning something new. So if our default setting is to not really be very engaged with what we're doing when we're actually doing it, learning to do so can be challenging and difficult. Where mindfulness feels overwhelming to people is often because their conception of it is incorrect. And what they're trying to do is clear their minds of thoughts, trying to clear their self of worry, or to never think about the future, or to think about the past, or to create a state of non-thinking. Mm-hmm. That's not what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is a state of free thinking and free feeling, but it's a relationship with our thoughts and feelings in our environment where they are as they are, not what we think they should be, or we're trying to fix them. And so what might be helpful for people feeling overwhelmed about mindfulness, there are several pages that I devote to understanding about what mindfulness is and what it isn't. And as we're learning to be present more often, we have to have the freedom to not be present as well. Which means if I'm in, let's say, a mindfulness practice, I'm allowing myself to learn to connect with my breath, which basically means I'm focusing on the physical sensation that tells me I'm breathing in the moment that I'm in right now. It's basically an embodiment of how I experience living in the present moment or performing in the present moment. Inevitably, my thoughts are going to go somewhere else because we're not robots, and our brain isn't designed indeed to shift time frames or to shift focus. But if I use those natural shifts as opportunities in a non-judgmental way to go, whoa, your focus has shifted to something that is important to you, but not relevant or valuable to you right now, and use that as an opportunity to allow our focus to come back to the present moment, to focus on what we're doing, and do this repeatedly in the same way that if you were in a gym and your muscles started to burn a little bit, you would allow it for an opportunity. Can I squeeze out 1 or 2 more reps? And what happens is that mindfulness practice starts to become a strength training session for our awareness. And our awareness for us is important because it's the first line of information processing for everything about us on a neurological, psychological, physiological, and biological level. And of course, all that impacts how we play golf. So while mindfulness can feel overwhelming at first, oftentimes it's usually because it's different. It's like learning another language, and we create expectations about it that are not really what it's about.
And just by reading the book, my awareness is so much is so much greater that I really have no excuse when I'm out on the golf course now, or even just thinking about what's coming up as far as tournaments or competition wise. Like just by reading the book, I'm more aware of what's going on, and my inner experience and how to handle it. So it's a really great book. But I want to get into what our show is about today, which is 6 myths about performance. And so I wanted to go through each one and have you kind of explain and clear up a couple things that I know a lot of listeners have probably heard in the past, and maybe move past them. How's that sound? Good?
That'd be great.
All right. So the first myth is a little bit of anxiety is a good thing.
It's not, as long as if what you're trying to do is thrive. So I have read every single golf psychology book I could find before writing mine, and the vast majority of them use the exact sentence, a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. And yet all of my clients were coming to me complaining about anxiety. So if you dive into the research on anxiety and really understand where it comes from, we find out that it is disruptive. Very specifically, part of the reason people are have this confusion or this myth persists is because we use the word stress, anxiety, and nerves interchangeably, and those three are not the same thing. So stress is duration and intensity of demand. So that could be internal, external, et cetera, but it is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, playing golf is stressful. There's a duration and intensity and demand upon your skills. Mm-hmm. Nerves are a physiological response to stress for us, in which case our nervous system, specifically our sympathetic nervous system, starts to activate. Essentially, when your brain recognizes this is important to me and the outcomes are important to me for whatever reasons I have decided or are actually written in the rules, our nervous system activates to make us more athletic. And it can be uncomfortable for us. That's our elevated heart rate, our elevated breathing, right? Like we feel a little bit like this energy under our skin, like we're going to jump out of it a little bit. So it's basically it's the beginning levels are our fight, flight, or freeze response. But it is, again, it's not disruptive for us. In fact, most players tell me I play better when I'm nervous because there's an activation and there's an urgency to it, but the urgency is for now, not later. Which is where anxiety comes in, because anxiety by definition is worry about the future. And in the future, what happens where anxiety differs from nerves is trying to get us activated for now. There's an immediate amount of stress that you need to respond to. Anxiety by definition is I'm playing out worst case scenarios in my brain in the future. So I'm imagining a future that is my brain perceives as worth trying to save me from. Now, why anxiety is not a good thing, even a little bit of it, is it creates multitasking with a time frame that doesn't exist. Meaning I always have one foot in the present moment and I always have one foot in the future. And the foot in the future feels like a much more powerful stronghold because I've imagined it in a way that my brain goes, yeah, that's worth saving yourself from. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately what happens is we are never really focused on what we are doing because we're multitasking with avoidance through anxiety. Meaning I have 2 tasks. The first task is pursue the shot you want right now. Try to go play great. And don't let the thing you don't want to happen. And so what happens in anxiety is I have competing tasks. I'm never really just immersed in the thing that I'm doing when it's happening. I'm always also trying to avoid something that I don't want to happen. And in a survival-based setting, when our brain evolves this type of ability, this was super helpful for us because we saved ourselves from dangers before they happened. Mm-hmm. But in a thriving-based setting, it disrupts our physical skills. It often starts to shut down the parts of our brains where we can make conscious, rational, and informed decisions. And we don't have access to whatever skills we have currently developed in a coordinated fashion. So calling anxiety just arousal is not true. It's a fear-based arousal, and fear-based arousal produces a different physical response than just being immediately aroused or nervously aroused, which is something that is a bit of a superpower for us as human beings, honestly.
That was so interesting that you said, because I did think that being nervous is what was meant by a little bit of anxiety is a good thing. So I'm thinking it is that saying in regards to being nervous. So it's funny that you said nerves are activating your athleticism. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, but I love that saying, first of all. Yeah. And then, so it was nice to kind of split those. And
they feel differently to us too, Tori. Nerves is a combination of adrenaline and dopamine. So adrenaline is another way of saying energy. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter for our brain, our neuromodulator in our brain for pursuit. So it feels good to us. Anxiety is just adrenaline. Adrenaline by itself does not feel good for us, which is why we feel the worry, the tension, the overarching worry comes on a neurochemical level from that. The psychological difference is the time frame that is prioritized between the two. One is a priority for the future and the other is a priority for now. And we as humans do pretty good under stress when we are now.
So a question, since we're talking about anxiety, what is a healthy form of wanting a certain outcome? How do you be healthy around that scenario? As
a general rule of thumb, if we're talking about a thriving setting, not a surviving setting, the rule of thumb is need versus want. And that's not my personal opinion. That's just how our brain operates. It sees things we tell it we need and the things that we want very differently. So if I tell myself, I want to play great today, and that is a future projection of what I want my performance to be, that registers to different parts of my brain in a different way than I need to play well today. Needing to play well today makes that the priority. Wanting to play well goes, that is the desired outcome. But how about we prioritize what's going on right now in order to move toward that? When something we need, or we're really telling ourselves must not happen, it then becomes the priority because the parts of our brain that are designed to attend to our needs are far faster and far stronger and designed for survival only. And they don't care about the difference between a perceived need and a actual need. Mm-hmm. And so if I tell myself I absolutely need to play well today, and that's not the competitive constraint, that's what I am adding to it in a narrative kind of way, a subjective narrative, I'm starting to create the foundation for anxiety where I'm constantly going to be drawn to the future. And in a way where then automatically my brain is going to start tossing around the idea of, well, what if you don't get what you need? Because there's no guarantees for us in the future. And the reason anxiety by definition is trying to create certainty in the future. But because the future is always uncertain, it can't find it. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on unless we start to intervene. And the important thing for people to understand about anxiety is the opposite of anxious is not relaxed. It's present.
That's interesting. Sorry, I'm taking that line in too. So the opposite of anxious is present, not relaxed.
As a matter of fact, if you have somebody who's anxious, including ourselves, and we're feeling anxious and we tell ourselves to relax, it's about the worst thing you could do for somebody.
Yeah.
Because you're essentially highlighting you don't feel relaxed. You should be feeling relaxed. And now all I've done is highlight the disparity between what you're actually experiencing and what you would prefer to be experiencing in a way that makes us feel worse. And for us as human beings, if I told you you're anxious and now you feel bad about being anxious, you're getting farther away from being able to thrive, not closer.
Yeah. Okay. I can go down a rabbit hole with anxiety. So let's move on to number 2, which is using willpower to change and perform better. Using willpower. That's a trigger word right there.
Sure. One of the more common outdated performance advice from, unfortunately, people in my field is like, you need to make a promise to yourself that you're going to do this before a round and just commit to it no matter what. Well, that would be like telling yourself you need to never eat a piece of candy ever again in your life and make a promise to yourself that you're not going to do it. And then you go into a candy shop repeatedly and hungry. And so the reason willpower doesn't work for 2 reasons. The first is willpower is just an idea. It's not a real thing. If you look at the science behind how we make decisions and what we're motivated by and how we get into complex behavior change, willpower is by far the least. There's a bunch of research that shows that if it's an actual resource for us as human beings to tap into, it is incredibly limited and we run out and it wears us out. Which is why going into a round of golf, promising yourself you're not going to get angry will wear you out. And you'll eventually just get angry because you'll have run out of willpower. Mm-hmm. Most research shows us that willpower is not really a thing. It's us trying to use the slowest and weakest parts of our brain to overpower the fastest and strongest parts of our brain. And so instead of willpower, what's far more effective for us is using awareness, and in a way that starts to point out cause and effect in a way that can start to counterbalance our sensory experience. So our brain and nervous system is designed to favor our direct sensory experience, like feeling hungry or feeling angry, or what way we feel or think about a shot immediately after it's over, far more than it's designed to pay attention to what is the cause and effect of what I'm doing here. Which is why if you're on a diet and I'm just going to willpower my way through it, or try to quit smoking with willpower, we know these are some of the least effective means for quitting or changing your behavior. And everything we're doing while we're playing golf is just a behavior, mental or physical. And so if we're trying to change them with willpower, oftentimes what happens is we just dive farther and farther into our sensory experience, which on our brain level, again, a neurological level, is only reinforcing the behavior, not helping us step away from it and perhaps to something more useful. So I would recommend to people, if you're, that the litmus test for this, which I introduced in the book, is like, willpower every single putt you have into the hole, and willpower yourself to be unwaveringly confident, and then come tell me how long it lasts, because it's not going to last very long.
Yeah. And so you said willpower is an idea, so it's not even real. It's just perceived.
In many ways. Yeah. So there's something about us as human beings that we can kind of dig down and find something. But if you really peel back the layers on, there's some deeper motivation, there's some level of awareness for what it is that we're doing, et cetera, rather than I've just rushed my way to something different. Mm-hmm. And if you really look at willpower, again, what it's doing is it's trying to use the slowest and weakest parts of our brain to get us to do things against the grain of the fastest and strongest parts of our brain, which is where our habits live. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing that, that's like trying to use a golf cart to overdo a bulldozer. Like, yeah, you can push the gas as much as you want, but you're not going to win that battle, especially over time, and especially in the face of triggered temptation. And that might, a diet, that might be you're now at a restaurant that you love and you're trying to not eat cheese fries. On the golf courts, that's I just bladed one over the green and I'm going to try to willpower myself not to be angry. Mm-hmm. To me, it's an unrealistic expectation, again, based on how our brain is designed. And it's not the most effective strategy for us, because if it worked, people would do it. Like, I wouldn't have a job if players could just will themselves into confidence or just will the ball into the hole.
If willpower is more perceived, then is grit the actual then?
So grit is passion and persistence toward long-term outcomes.
Okay.
That is a cause and effect relationship, not a direct sensory experience. Now, that's a bit of an overstatement and overgeneralization, but grit is I'm going to stay engaged with something when it gets hard because, and then fill in whatever blanks are important to you. The other part about grit that we know is that people who are really gritty, their psychological framework is that of a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the idea that I'm a work in progress, and with effort and passion and persistence over time, I can get better at something. So my underlying belief is sticking in this is worth it for me because that's what leads to growth. And so anytime something gets difficult, I don't have to power my way through it. I'm aware of the fact that if I stay in this, it's going to lead to the types of changes that I am looking for. That is an awareness and a cause and effect relationship with something that goes, if I stay in this, I'm likely to get the things I want. Willpower into something is like, just do it, just do it, just do it, without any well, that'll make it worth it, or you'll just get what you want right now. And if you do that transaction over and over again, there's no amount of willpower that's going to move you through something as challenging as golf. That is for sure.
Okay, moving on. Controlling focus with distraction. This one was another interesting one that probably a lot of listeners have heard in the past as far as a tip for mindset on the golf course. So what do you have for us?
An example of these distraction techniques in golf is for example, if I'm experiencing the yips, I'm just going to change my grip, or I'm going to hum, or I'm going to, another player told me I just hover the putter, all these types of things, or perhaps doing math in my head would be one of them, or I'm counting backwards from 100, or all of these things, which again, it's based on outdated neurology, which is much this left brain, right brain idea that the left part of my brain is the analytical, the right part is the performing part, which we know is not really true. When we're doing math or performing, both parts of our brain are, both halves of our hemispheres are active. And what they're trying to do is go, well, if I'm focused on this distraction over here, it will keep me from really worrying about the thing that I don't want to happen, which is missing a putt, yipping another shot, embarrassing myself, etc. Which really what you're doing is you're trying to distract yourself from your relationship with outcomes. And this doesn't work because our brain is specifically designed to sniff those out. Because 15,000 years ago, if your brain couldn't sniff out a distraction from what was actually relevant, you would die. And so when we put ourselves in thriving environments where the outcomes and the experience is indeed important to us, these distraction techniques, one, they don't work very long. And if they do, it's just a matter of time before they fall apart, which is why you see people who are struggling with the yips change putters, change grips, change whatever a bazillion different times, because they're not addressing the source, which is I am focused on something in the future or worried about something that is disrupting my physical skills that I'm perceiving as so threatening that I'm trying to distract myself instead of squaring up and dealing with why it is that I'm finding that to be such a threatening experience in the first place. And so the remedy to distraction is to actually just be present and be engaged with your task and bring a high level of acceptance to all possible outcomes. That's the formula for allowing yourself to actually be engaged with the task at hand and try to do it as well as you can rather than trying to distract yourself towards success. And unfortunately, this has become a really prevalent set of habits for a lot of different people. So instead of me dealing with the discomfort of the fact that this shot might go somewhere that I don't want to, and being willing to coexist with that uncertainty and the discomfort, I'm going to try to smother it with a distraction. The downside with distractions is it doesn't actually eliminate the thing that you're trying to deal with. And so if I just keep covering with distraction, now I need another one, and I need another one, and I need another one. And then again, based on how our brain is designed, those things start to wear out. We build a tolerance to them. And pretty soon you can't distract yourself from the thing, and you have to eventually deal with it. And if you're not willing to, the fastest way to do that is to stop playing. Yeah. And then the other part about this is when we are distracted, things are less enjoyable for us. We're just always multitasking. And if you want to take something like golf that is inherently enjoyable, even when it's difficult and includes some failure, and make it a less enjoyable experience, it's to add distraction. You know, if you use flow state, which is the optimal state of human functioning that is inherently enjoyable to us, as a frame of reference, it is a state void of distraction. We are immersed in the task at hand with an acceptance for all possible outcomes. That's the framework, the two primary elements of flow state. And the reason it's really enjoyable to us is because we're engaged with the task as it's happening, which is a high dopaminergic state for us. It feels good to pursue the things we want, knowing that failure is perhaps an option. It feels really good for us as humans. Distraction moves us farther from that, not closer to it.
Okay, so let's use the short putt, the putting yips as the example then. So you're saying don't use the distraction techniques in order to complete the task. Instead, you got to stay present. But before were talking about, thinking about what you didn't want to happen. So staying in the present, but also really focusing on what you do want to happen. I'm just trying to think of what the better option is.
Groundedness is important, being present. Yeah. The question with the yips, though, is oftentimes what we're doing is we are creating a future, an imaginary future about the yips that becomes so threatening that the yips is essentially a threat response, which means my brain and body are trying to get me either to avoid an event altogether or to get through it as fast as possible to get out of my current discomfort. And so with the yips, there's two forms. There's literally the involuntary jerky motions involved. That's your brain trying to get you through a shot as fast as possible, not as well as possible. And the reason is because we have told it, potentially yipping this or missing a short putt is an unacceptable outcome. And then for whatever subjective story we tell ourselves about that is threatening enough that our brain goes, yeah, I better yip you through this. So the yips, people think there's something wrong with my brain. No, it's working exactly how it's designed to operate when you tell it there's an unacceptable outcome with a very consequential future for you in a threatening way. The other form of the yips is I just can't pull the trigger. I stand over a ball and I can't take the club back. And that's your brain going, well, just don't do it then. In the same way that in a survival-based setting, if you went, well, if I go over there, I'm going to die, it would go, I will save you from it because you're too dumb to figure it out. Right. And so in a thriving setting, what that really translates to is the reason we have such a difficult time being present with that putt or chip or whatever. And the yips is the habitual response we have to it is because we're unwilling to accept all but a tiny range of results. Yeah. You increase your level of acceptance to all the outcomes and experiences you do not want to have as part of, a chip, a swing, a missed putt, etc. And your brain stops perceiving that miss or the possibility of yipping another putt as a response that it needs to save you from. In which case, then you'll have freedom to actually be present. It's difficult for us to wrap our heads around the idea of acceptance because we typically tell ourselves acceptance is unacceptable. Because if I allow for something I don't want to happen, that means I'm resigning myself to less, or I don't care about it, or that when there's outcomes we don't want to happen, the way to move toward the ones that we want is with resistance and avoidance. And in a survival-based setting, in a world of scarcity, that was indeed true. In a world of abundance where we're trying to thrive, it creates multitasking with avoidance. So the yips is essentially multitasking with avoidance to the nth degree, to the point where your brain goes, it is far more of a priority for us to save you from the outcome and the experience you've told us is unacceptable than it is for you to make this putt. Like on a neurological level, a 2-foot putt is nowhere near the top of the priority list for somebody who's experiencing the yips, because the priority they're telling their brain must have is don't miss this, or don't you dare yip this again, or don't you dare embarrass yourself. And when you open the door to perhaps having those experiences, your brain goes, oh, well, if I don't have to save you from that, well, you should go ahead and pursue the thing that you want. Mm-hmm. The issue with the yips is it's trying to create a guarantee, and that guarantee does not exist.
Very interesting. Okay. Next up, number 4, perception is reality.
This one pairs nicely with the last one in that most of the time we as humans, not just in golf, we suffer more in imagination than we do reality. Mm-hmm. Quite often, the things that we find threatening are perceived. For example, I have to play well today, and if I don't, I'm just a terrible golfer. All perception, not reality. Every golf round, every golf shot is a mutually exclusive event. Me thinking it's the biggest thing in the world and will ruin my life is a perception that we create. And the reason our brain operates so heavily on perception is because in any moment in our lives, there's just too much information for our brain to be able to process. And it's a crazy fast processor. It processes billions of bits of information per second. But even with that speed, if I'm in a golf tournament and there's people watching and there's score, and I'm comparing this to how I played before, and I'm wondering how I'm going to play in the future, there's too much information. And so it operates by trying to fill in these gaps. The issue with these gaps is they're only a small piece of what the actual reality that we are facing is, and they are highly subjective. And so when we start to fall into perception, it's always this subjective experience. And the more subjective we get, it's not that it's bad, it makes us more emotional. So all of our emotions most of our emotions tend to stem from our subjective perceptions of the events and experiences of our lives. And so the more we dive into, well, this feels like it's a problem. There's a big difference between something feeling like it's a problem and it actually being a problem. Mm-hmm. There's a big difference between feeling like you're not putting well and actually not putting well, et cetera. And so if we start to understand, hey, stop subjectively seeing things and start to learn to see them more objectively, we're dealing more with our current reality as it is. And we as human beings, research shows over and over again, we're pretty resilient when we're dealing with our reality as it is. We are far less resilient when we are throwing on these subjective, perceptive layers to it. We as human beings are going to be subjective. We are innately subjective, and we are going to have perceptions that sometimes are helpful and sometimes they aren't. The more we start to pay attention to how we are perceiving things, the beliefs we bring to them, the thoughts we are bringing to them, the more we can start to see, well, how much am I adding to this versus how much of it is actually true? For example, to win a golf tournament, you have to finish first among however many entrants. That is a fact. That's objective. That's in the rules. I have to play perfectly, or I feel like I have to play perfectly in order to do that. All perception. Mm-hmm. It's a subjective rendering of what it is that we think we need to do. And if we start to pay attention to those perceptives, we can start to peel back some of the self-imposed and unnecessary constraints we bring to our performance, which again moves us a lot closer to where we perform at our best, which is just being immersed in the task at hand. Flow state doesn't involve subjective assessment of our performance.
Okay, before we move on to number 5, before I forget, this mindset work and everything that that you talk about in your book, is this what sets really great players apart?
It's one of the many factors. Yeah. Like, I don't want to pretend that our psychology is the only factor, because that's not necessarily true. If you're a scratch golfer and I'm a 20 handicap, and I'm 20 handicap with completely stable confidence, and yours is shatterable easily, you're so much better than me that you're very likely still going to beat me, right? Unless I create enough constricting conditions where your confidence is exposed for long enough. Yeah. However, the way our body works, the biological, physiological, and neurological non-negotiables are the first order of operations for us doing anything physically starts with our brain. And so if you take the best players in the world, let's just keep it in golf, or even just the best performers in the world, there's really three areas that we can train. You can train your body to be faster, stronger, more flexible, have more endurance, which is crazy important. You could be the most confident golfer in the world, but if you haven't trained yourself to withstand the physical stress of playing golf, you're not going to play very well.
Yeah.
Right. We can train our craft meaning the skills, the strategies, the equipment, etc. Also really important. You could be the most confident and most fit golfer in the world. If you have equipment that doesn't fit and you haven't trained a swing to be able to execute well, you're not going to perform well. Mm-hmm. And we can train our mind, which means understanding your psychology, understanding where you focus, understanding what keeps you from being present more often, and building more stable confidence. The best performers in the world are not leaving any of those three up to chance. Now, you can develop all of those organically, but if you're really trying to compete with the best people in the world, it's a systematic approach to doing so. There's not a Olympian on the planet that leaves their diet up to chance, or their training up to chance. It's surprising to me sometimes, perhaps it shouldn't be, but it's surprising to me how many people leave their psychology up to chance, in which case then it's just a bit of a pachinko machine. And it might not be surprising to you, but, talking with pro athletes and you ask them like, hey, what's your confidence built on? Oftentimes like, I don't know. Or how do you get mentally prepared to perform? I just kind of this. And so again, it's always left up to chance. Hence how often, even though they're very skilled and very trained in terms of their competence and physical abilities, they're really inconsistent because they're leaving that third leg up to chance. And that third leg doesn't fall into place on its own, other than situationally. And
just out of curiosity, how often do you meet with your clients?
It depends on what they want and need. Mm-hmm. So one of the things about psychology we know for sure is that forcing people into a regimented schedule isn't necessarily what's best for everybody. It'd be similar to physical training. Like depending on what you're doing, you might need to train every day. If you're getting ready for a marathon, it's a lot of days in a row.
Yeah.
If you're getting ready for something else, there's rest might be more of a priority than the training itself. Right. Mm-hmm. So with my clients, it depends. If you're a pro golfer and you're really invested in trying to develop your mind, like I might meet with them every week or 10 days. Mm-hmm. If you're somebody who's like, I'm just a little bit curious about what I'm doing, I want to learn more about it, or perhaps depending on what your actual demands of your schedule are, it could be 2 or 3 weeks between. Mm-hmm. There is certainly something to be said about enough time in between for people to be able to take the information, absorb it, process it, put it into action. And before, it's a bit of a scaffolding approach where we might have a session and then there's some bricklaying that they've got to do in between. Mm-hmm. And then we'll have another session. They're going to lay some more bricks. If the scaffolds get too far apart, the wall gets a little wobbly.
Yeah.
If it's too close together, there's no point in putting two scaffolds on the same line.
Yeah.
Right. So it can vary is a very long-winded answer.
Yeah. No, I like it. It's interesting. Okay. Number 5, just fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it. The long and the short of it is that confidence is something that is built on authenticity. And faking confidence, for example, with body language that is not actually reflective of your inner experience, saying things that aren't necessarily authentic to you, that are kind of like it's very difficult. I would ask you, how confident would you be in somebody if you looked at them and you listened to what they were saying and you went, nah, I don't think so. They're lying.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. So the same goes for us. Me telling myself, oh, you're the best golfer in the world. If I don't genuinely believe that, is undermining what I'm doing, because now not only am I experiencing what I'm experiencing, I'm also lying to myself. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes what the fake it till you make it approach is do for us is they're trying to create a sense of comfort and certainty. But performing at a high level, or even performing in golf in general, is oftentimes uncomfortable and it's always uncertain. And so the more I try to create comfort and certainty by faking it where it cannot be found, it's not a surprise that undermines confidence rather than building it. And there's a certain sense for us as human beings that when we do things in an inauthentic way for long enough, it starts to eat at us. Mm-hmm. There's some psychology in the 1970s that essentially introduced the idea of a front stage self and a backstage self. The front stage self is the image we project to other people and to ourselves when we're feeling uncomfortable and uncertain, and perhaps our insecurities are perhaps triggered. The backstage self is our authentic self. It's us stripped of all the performative nonsense. The farther apart these become, the less happy, less healthy, and less high functioning we become as human beings. And if you do this for long enough, then we're starting to talk about like the clinical psychological impact on people. If you live a fake life for long enough, you will be depressed and anxious. There's really no doubt about that. That's why social media oftentimes creates anxiety for us, is I'm projecting this front stage self to the world, but my real life is actually this.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we do that with our confidence, like I'm projecting that I feel like everything's great, everything's wonderful, that I'm the best player in the world, that I can't miss a shot. But in the back, I'm going like, that's not really true. That's what undermines our confidence in the fake it and make it approach. And the bottom line is, unfortunately, this idea that like you just need to act confident to be confident, or pretend you're confident, and that will then turn into confidence. There's an inherent inauthenticity to it that chews at our confidence from underneath, and it's very difficult to be confident in a stable way there. And it's only a matter of time before either over time, the duration of that starts to chew away at you, kind of like sand starting to be eroded slowly, or it just blows up all at once when you are actually under pressure and stable confidence required and you don't have it.
Okay. And finally, success requires a chokehold on goals. And you're talking to a goal-oriented person right here. Mm-hmm. So let's hear it. What's your thoughts on goals? Yeah,
goals are good for us as human beings, to be very clear. If we as humans don't have meaningful objectives in our lives, we're a bit aimless. And again, that's not the happiest, healthiest, or highest functioning type of existence for us as humans. And anyone playing golf, there are going to be outcomes and experiences that you are after. There's a difference between being goal-oriented and having a chokehold on goals. Chokehold on goals means they have to happen for me, or I must make progress for them at the rate that I think that they should happen. And if I don't, I double down my grip on them. Mm-hmm. What happens for us on a psychological level is we start to become more attentionally and emotionally beholden to these goals, to the point where they become the distraction. So what happens is my future goal is so, I have such a strong chokehold on this future goal or future goals that I can't be present because they are still always the priority. So there's something about really high performing people where they do have future objectives that they are pursuing, and they are super crisp and clear about them. They are then able to emotionally and attentionally detach from them so they can invest in what they need to do now to move toward them. When we have this overly emotional and overly attentional chokehold on our goals, what we know happens is three things. First is people have a really hard time being present. Again, the priority is for a time frame that we are not in which case then we are causing disruption to our performance in the present because we're multitasking with, well, how close or how far away am I from my goals? Yeah. The second is that we see how people have really inconsistent effort because we're always doing this calculus about, am I moving toward my goal that I'm emotionally and attentionally attached to? Am I farther from it? And if you're playing a round of golf and your objective is to shoot whatever low score you want relative to your handicap, there's going to be a shot in there somewhere that tells you you're actually moving farther away, not closer. Mm-hmm. In which case then when we get to those points, if we have this chokehold on our goals, it's very easy for us to give up. And so we find in our research over and over again that people who are so chokeholdy on their goals, when things start to get tough for them and get averse, they are far more likely to give up their effort than they are to stick with it, which is counterintuitive to what you would expect from somebody who's like, I'm always just pursuing my goals. We actually see they give up really quickly because as soon as their mind does the calculus of, I don't think it's going to happen today, it gives them a reason to check out. Mm-hmm. And the last thing that we see from people is that they become risk averse, which is another way of saying your confidence gets super unstable because they're not actually trying to pursue their goals. They're trying to protect them. And the bottom line is if a goal is important enough for you to pursue, there's still always a chance that your best effort might not reach it. And if I'm always trying to save myself from that possibility of not reaching my goals, the priority does not become pursuing them, in which case then your confidence becomes destabilized. And the bottom line is if you really want to pursue the things meaningful for you in golf or anywhere in life, there's a risk that it might not work out. And for people who are unwilling to take that risk, that essentially means they've taken themselves out of the race before they get there. So with our chokehold on goals, again, it's important for us to have meaningful outcomes and experiences. And it's a psycho-emotional need for us to pursue things that are meaningful for us. It's not a psycho-emotional need for us to actually get them to be happy, healthy, and high functioning. There are plenty of people who have the goal of winning a major who have had tremendously successful careers. Mm-hmm. But if it's a absolute must, and if it doesn't happen, my career is a waste of time and this has all been for naught, At some point, that's going to catch up with you, and it's going to be really difficult for you to be present in the tournament that you're in. And it's going to be very difficult to stay motivated because it's so extrinsically motivated that as soon as that extrinsic motivation is not available to you, it's hard to stay engaged with something.
So with goals, you can make a goal, draw out some sort of outline of, okay, I think this needs to happen in order to achieve my goal, and then just trust the process. It almost is, you have to take on that mentality of trusting it, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, I might offer an updated version of trust the process.
Okay, I like it.
Commit to the process.
Okay.
Trust is a sense of certainty. Like, well, if I do this, I'm very sure it will work out. When we make even the best laid plans, often we might feel varying senses of certainty about them, but the bottom line is there's always a level of uncertainty. For clarifying what it is that you're trying to pursue, whether it's outcome wise, then reeling back, okay, well, what is the action required for me to be able to do this? Not the more action, but the best actions. And then can I commit to those as there's going to be some level of variance along the way. And I mean, progress toward goals is hardly ever linear. Matter of fact, if your progress toward goals is linear, it's probably a very low bar.
Yeah.
Or you're just so early in the learning curve that any type of effort toward it is moving you toward it. Right. So what would be far better is, can I stay committed to these things long enough to find out if they're actually moving me toward it? If I need to trust it, well, as soon as I don't feel like I'm not really sure if this is the thing, it's really easy to just move right back to baseline, in which case then I've spent time, effort, resources. And then if I don't feel that trust, I just kind of snap back to where I'm going, which is, again, what happens when we have this chokehold on goals is we go, well, am I moving toward it? Oh, no, I didn't really see it today. And then we just snap back and now let me try something different. This is the life hack, tip, trick type of mentality toward moving toward the objectives that are important to us. If an objective is really that important to us, figuring out what the best course of action to move toward that, and then diving into that in a committed way and in an immersed way, meaning present in it, is a slow path toward progress toward goals, but it's still the fastest path.
So you've worked with LPGA players and PGA players. Is it different working from females to males? Is there significant differences?
On a personal psychological level or on a logistical structural level?
No, psychological level.
Psychological level. I would say the differences are less gender than they are just the differences between human beings.
Yeah.
If you look at the LPGA, you are going to get if we look at the tendencies for genders and you were to map them on a bell curve, you are going to get women that are by definition on the outlying end of like assertiveness and competitiveness and task orientation. But that doesn't mean they're not also highly socially oriented, emotionally oriented, relationship oriented, etc. In the same way on the PGA Tour, you are also going to get a bell curve of highly task oriented, competitive, assertive men, perhaps more than the general population of men. But they are also relationship oriented, also emotionally invested in their performance and the people around them, and also have a high level of camaraderie for the most part. Not everybody likes each other or interacts with each other, but the differences I see between people are far more their personal psychology, their past events and experiences, the stories they've told themselves about those, and the skills they've developed far more than, well, a man responds this way or a woman responds this way, because it's just, that is not the variable that is a separator between people in my experience anyway.
Okay, well, to wrap things up, how's your relationship with golf? What's going on with you on the golf course?
Currently distant. It is major season as we're recording this. So we're between I was just at the Women's PGA Championship last week. I'll be getting ready to go to the Men's Senior Open this week. And then there's the British Open for both the men and women and Avion for women. So I spend a lot of time on the driving range and golf course and the putting green, and not a lot of it actually practicing, although I did just construct a hitting bay in my yard. So hopefully I can find some pockets to be able to practice a little bit. But at the moment, it is my golf experience is on the back burner. Other people's golf experiences is more front of mind. Have
you ever found yourself not enjoying the game and had to question
and then usually I need to just check myself. And by that, I don't mean like, hey, snap out of it, but like, what are the thoughts that I'm bringing to this that is creating it? Now, by the way, playing poor golf or well below your skill level is not necessarily enjoyable, and people don't need to pretend that it is. But again, then we have to ask, well, how much of this is just the part of golf is hard and I'm trying to do the best with it based on what I've currently developed, and how much am I bringing from a subjective and self-imposed way. And usually when I do that, it offers me the opportunity to reground and be present more often. I particularly like playing golf. I really like playing golf when score counts. And so if I'm not enjoying either of those, it's usually because things have gone well awry, which is rare, or it's because I'm bringing something to it that is causing the experience to be infected by myself.
Yeah. Well, Raymond, thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast today and fill us all in on the 6 myths of performance. Again, your book, Golf Beneath the Surface, I highly recommend. It is a very significant, in-depth sports psychology book. I mean, I just say that because it's just, there's so much more to it than some of the books that are out there. It's going to be
a comprehensive.
Yes.
The book puts the reader's psychology as the main character, not me, not my clients necessarily, not this is the wisdom I've gained and you should just listen to it and apply it. It's the reader's psychology. And to do that, there's a certain level of comprehension, and by comprehensive, I mean comprehensiveness to it. I would challenge anyone to read it and not be able to find something that can help them have a better and more fulfilling relationship with golf, and probably play a little bit better too.
Well, thanks again, Raymond, for being on. All the details are in the show notes. And until next time, thanks.
Thank you, Tori. Appreciate you.